Good evening. I'm glad you came back. This is part 2 of our seminar on the dangers of the first fruits of Zion and their Torah clubs. I won't do much recap from last week because we only got to 55 slides last week, and in theory, we got about 75 to get done tonight, so, maybe. I'm hopeful. Hope springs eternal. So let's dig right in. We'll pick up where we left off. It's number 5 in your packet, or letter E, because the PowerPoint went differently on that. Before we begin, 2 quick corrections. On my slide last week, I, for whatever reason, had Boaz Michael's given name as Michael Detweiler. I'm not sure why I did that, but it's actually Christopher Detweiler. It doesn't matter too much because he doesn't go by that name, and you'll never see it in their publications or on their website or anything like that, but I didn't want to have that error in there. And another quick thought. I mentioned last week I was talking about individuals and groups that are targeted by First Fruits of Zion, the people that they hope to have as their converts to their cause, to their system. And the folks from Iowa, the Baptist Church in Iowa I've been in contact with and talking about, said actually, in our case, it's not disaffected people, but it's extra dedicated people. The people in their church who have become a part of this, who they've been trying to reason with and talk with, were people that just really are fascinated by the study of Israel, by its history, by the religion of Israel, by Judaism, and they just wanted to study more, and that's how they got started on this path. So while I think long-term, the most likely people are those that are disaffected, disenchanted, disillusioned by the church because of how negative their opinion is of the church, as we'll see if we get that far tonight. Don't forget that this is also the kind of thing that's presented as an in-depth Bible study for people that really want to know. And it reminds me in that sense a little bit of the mystery religions. If you study the ancient Near East, there were a number of cults or religions that didn't tell people what they were really about when they were initiates. You had to study for a while before they would tell you the deep mysteries, before they would let you know what it's really about. And people were drawn to that. I want to be one of the select few, the proud, the Marines kind of thing, right? There is an appeal to that at times as well. So let's dig in. Letter E. And I fixed the flipping the thing, so it's not going to actually jump around on you this time. I found where that was. That there has never been a covenant with the Gentiles, thus it's only through becoming a Jew in spirit and in practice that one can be a full, true follower of Jesus Christ. Remember that these are my categories. I've organized these examples as best I can to fit into them. So why is that? Well, of course, they believe that Torah is everlasting, that it was given and it always will be. So therefore, the only entrance into the kingdom of God has to be through Judaism. Therefore, how could there ever be a new covenant with a different people? That's their line of reasoning. Let's look at the examples and we'll show you what they're talking about. The first one, we believe that a non-Jew's position in Israel and participation in Torah are the natural results of his identity in Messiah. As believers in Messiah, non-Jews have a right and a responsibility to take hold of the commandments of God. These first few quotes are from their pre-2009 publications, and remember we said after 2009 they technically switched from divine mandate to divine permission. Once I show you these initial ones, we'll look at some more recent ones, and you'll realize they really haven't changed their viewpoint on this at all. It's still being taught as a requirement, not just a if you want to kind of thing, at least in their publications. So let's keep going and look at the next one. In this teaching, we present that the new covenant is made with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, resulting in the restoration of Israel. It is a common teaching of First Fruits of Zion that there is no covenant made with the people of the nations, the Gentiles. Our position is that the Ger, that's the Gentiles, was always considered to be equal participants in Israel based on their faith and faithfulness to the covenants This is not a replacement theology, this is a theology of inclusion. In other words, their understanding is that the new covenant is simply to bring Gentiles into Israel. We'll keep going, and then I'll start to explain some of these. This is one that I think will drive it home. The core teaching at First Fruits of Zion has always been one of full non-Jewish participation in the things of Torah and the people of Israel. We have predicated this participation upon the individual's identity in Messiah alone. We believe that as disciples of the Torah-observant Messiah, we are beholden to imitate his life and conform to his teaching. We believe in Torah observance on the basis of our identity in Yeshua. We believe that we have a position in Israel on the basis of the Messiah of Israel's position within each one of us. Let's break that down a little bit, okay? We know this, right? Jesus was incarnate, became a man as a Jew, right? Born of the Virgin Mary of the line of David. We know this. This is core Orthodox Christian theology from the beginning. We know that he kept the law of Moses perfectly, as no one ever before did, right? All right? In order that he might fulfill it would be our understanding of that, but we know that he kept it perfectly. That enables his righteousness under the law to become our righteousness. But nowhere as you read the Gospels and you see Jesus fulfilling the law, do you hear Jesus say, now in the future, the Gentiles are going to have to imitate my life to the extent of following Torah. Are we charged with imitating Jesus? Absolutely, right? Jesus' compassion, Jesus' love, Jesus' understanding, all sorts of things are we to imitate Jesus. But nowhere are we told we need to live like a first century Jewish person. All right? But they are making that assumption, that if Jesus lived this way, we must live this way. So take note of that. But also notice this. There's, I think, sloppy teaching leaking in here. The Messiah is not within each of Jesus' followers. Notice that at the bottom of the quote. The Messiah of Israel's position within each one of us. What's going on here? Now, normally, I wouldn't make a big deal about that because in Trinitarian theology, if we say the Father, the Son, or the Spirit is doing something, God is doing it. But they are saying that because Jesus is in you, you have to live like he did. But Jesus is not in you. Jesus is a man. He took on human form. He's in one place. He's bound by time and space now. The Holy Spirit is in each one of us. And I wonder if that's not something that's bleeding through to some of their other understandings. I thought it jumped out at me because they're using it as a rationale to say, therefore you must. All right? We'll keep going. As always, when we finish one section, we'll stop for questions. This is the last of them from the older material, and then we'll see the new material, how it's not much different. What is not debatable is that all believers already have citizenship in Israel through faith in Messiah. Non-Jews are grafted into Israel. Non-Jews are made part of the commonwealth of Israel. Non-Jews are given the covenants of promise. All of this is accomplished only through faith in Messiah. We will eventually, in week 3, look at Romans 11 and see what does this actually teach. They put a lot of stock in the grafted in analogy that Paul uses in Romans 11. And they interpret it to say, you and I as Gentile believers in Jesus are grafted into Israel, into the nation and people of Israel. Long story short, we'll look at it later, we're not. We're into the promises of Abraham. But we're going to have to take the time to delve into that next week. But notice also, of course, Philippians 3:20 tells us our citizenship is not in any nation here, it's in heaven. All right? By the way, my series on the church and politics really delves into that. That is your free plug for the evening to one of my other ones. These, all the ones with an 8, are from the Ha-Yashad workbook that they're still using. Okay? So this is current teaching on this same subject. Believers have been brought into a new family, the family of Israel. Same thing. New Testament is not New Covenant. The New Testament's a collection of scriptures that tell about how the gospel brought about the New Covenant, but it is not actually the New Covenant itself. And I didn't have room, of course, for the whole quote from this workbook because it's a whole page, but after that quote, they have the quotation of Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36, both prophecies about the renewal of Israel. First Fruits of Zion believes that that is the new covenant. That is what Jesus was working with, those promises of renewal of Israel. And so nothing he is doing in the Gospels is the new covenant. It was already established in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. That is their understanding. Again, we'll look at Jeremiah next week and see what's really going on there. Number 7, the new covenant is a covenant only with the people of Israel. Pretty straightforward, right? Again, this is from the current workbook. If they've changed this understanding at all since 2009, it didn't bleed through to this. It's still right here. Here's 2 more. We learned that the new covenant was made only with God's chosen people, Israel. Gentiles, here's where we have it, who want to have a share in the new covenant must do so by participation in Israel through the Messiah of Israel. If you want to be a part of the new covenant, you have to participate in Israel. Of course, the question becomes, what does that mean? How does one participate in Israel? They have an answer for that. And number 9, from Paul's perspective in Galatians, the offense of the cross is Gentile inclusion in Israel. Now that might sound confusing to you. You've read Galatians, you've heard of Galatians. What is the offense of the cross in Galatians 3:13? It is not that Gentiles participate in Israel. That's not what Paul's talking about at all. The offense of the cross is that the Messiah is crucified, that he came not to reign but to die. That is the offense of the cross in Galatians. So this understanding of Galatians is very foreign to how that book has been read throughout the centuries. And here is where we take a turn. The Messiah did not come to start a new religion. He did not come to start the church. The word Christianity isn't in the New Testament, neither is the word church. Now you might be shaking your head and saying, wait a minute, I read my Bible. I've seen the word church in the New Testament quite a bit. I'll unpack what they're trying to say here, because this is what they really believe. All right? Christianity and the church should not exist, was never supposed to exist. I'll show you the video quotes if we get there tonight, if not next week. All right? This argument about what words are in the New Testament is laughably shallow. This is not how we do theology in our faith, by doing word count studies and things of that nature. All right? Is the word Christian in the New Testament? Yeah, 3 times. Acts 11:26, 26:28, and 1 Peter 4:16. So there are Christians in the New Testament, but no, there's not Christianity. That doesn't make any sense, right? Well, of course, the word's not there, but you know what is not in Torah? The word Jew, the word Jewish, and the word Judaism. They're not in Torah. So evidently Moses never intended to found Judaism. Is that the way we're going to do arguments? That's ridiculous, right? Because in Torah is the word Israelite. All right? So again, this is not a convincing argument in any way. What are the earliest Christians referred to in the book of Acts as the followers of the way? Eventually that term was dropped because they started being called Christians. All right? It's not any big thing. It's not a nefarious kind of change. It's simply the development of the terminology over time. If people are trying to make a theological argument with you about what words were used when a more modern word is now being used, that's very weak. Because language changes. That's not unusual. We've got another one coming right here. I'll dig into the second part of that. The idea of the church is as a separate entity that replaces Israel does not exist in the New Testament. There is no separate church in the New Testament, he says. Our Bibles should not even use the English word church to translate the Greek word ekklesia. Those of you who have had some Greek, whether you remember it or not, ekklesia is a word that was used in Greek, in Koine Greek, the Greek of the day, and it was used outside of the bounds of the church, of Christianity, to talk about a community, a group of people, or a congregation. So technically, you could put the word congregation instead of church in most contexts and be an accurate description. Actually, some of the reformers wanted to change it to congregation because they were upset with the high church at the time and wanted to stick it to them because they didn't believe in bishops. That's a separate side of the story. But again, that is not an argument that the word should not be translated as church. What do you want to replace it with? What's going to make more sense in English? That's not proving anything. But also, that is a strong blanket statement. There is no separate entity in the entirety of the church. Throughout the whole New Testament, they're saying, the only thing that exists is something within Israel. Let's look at the second quote and you'll see exactly what he's saying. This is the last one for this section. There is no church in the New Testament. There is no religion in the New Testament. The New Testament ecclesia was a community of Yeshua's disciples within the Jewish people. The religion of the New Testament ecclesia is Judaism. So there's their contention. Now that is absolutely false. All right? Every gathering of followers of Jesus in the New Testament is a part of Judaism. That's the claim. Nowhere did they meet apart from Judaism. Nowhere did they meet apart from realizing and recognizing and believing that they were a part of Judaism. That flies in the face of Paul's writings in the book of Acts. It's just not true. But of course, from their perspective, there is no path. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ, there is no path for you that does not involve becoming a part of Judaism in one way or another, spiritually, in spirit, in mind, in something. That is what they are saying. You have to be a part of Judaism because there should be no church. There is no Christianity. We'll get to the implications of that later. Let's stop for a minute because that's a big claim. And you're probably going, what? At this moment. So take a minute, think of a question while I get a drink of water. What do you got? All right, they're just chewing on it right now. Nobody has a question to start. You're going to have one eventually because there's a lot of stuff here. All right? So this is the perspective of the organization that sponsors and gives the materials to the local groups that are operating in our area. Why do we care about what First Fruits of Zion publishes, what their leaders believe? Because they're the ones that publish the materials that are taught here locally, right? That's why. Not because they themselves are coming here. I would be shocked if Boaz Michael shows his face in Venango County. He's probably got more important places. But if he did, we'd be like, whoa. But still, this is being taught here in one way, shape, or form because this is all their materials. Their videos, their pamphlets, their booklets, their books are all coming from this perspective. What's the next one? If there is no covenant with the Gentiles, and if there was never supposed to be a church or Christianity, where does that leave us? Right here. The faithful discipleship of Jesus Christ requires keeping the Mosaic law, including the dietary laws, which we usually call kosher, the Sabbath, and all of the festivals. First Fruits of Zion, I'll remind you of this, official stance is divine permission, that as followers of Jesus, we're allowed to obey Torah if we feel called by the Spirit to do so. And they will say exactly that. I have read that a number of times. However, their ongoing commitment to their former stated belief in one law, in other words, one law for everyone, Jew and Gentile alike, the divine mandate, that before 2009 was their official teaching. I think that's throughout all of their materials still, and I'll keep showing you examples. Again, let's start with the older stuff, and then we'll see that it continues. Number one, we share a desire to walk after the commandments and to live our lives in faithful obedience to God's Torah. We share a sense of belonging in the greater body of Israel. So being in Israel means keeping Torah. That makes sense if you were in Israel. The second one, a large number of non-Jewish believers who are seeking out their biblical roots in an attempt to return to a purer form of our faith. There's the first hint of something we're going to see later. They believe the church is corrupted. And therefore, if you go back to the beginning, that's more pure, a more pure expression, a more pure understanding of our faith. Here's a couple more from the older stuff, and then we'll see it continue. Lest there be any doubt about where First Fruits of Zion stands on this issue, allow me to remind everyone that First Fruits of Zion officially separated from the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations, the UMJC, in May of 2000 over the issue of Gentile inclusion. They said, we can't work with the Messianic Jews because they won't let Gentiles be like them. Now, that's in flux now, and that paper that I told you about that the International Association of Messianic Congregations put out was after 2009. That was in 2014. They were under the impression that First Fruits of Zion had walked away from this stance. I had some interactions with one of the people in their leadership, was basically saying, I don't think they're being straight with you. I think they've continued in this belief. And as we've seen, all of these new quotes are saying the same thing. When we get to the videos from 2022, you'll say, they haven't changed a bit. Number 4. We both espouse full non-Jewish participation in Israel. We both believe the Sabbath, the festivals, the dietary laws, and the whole of Torah applies equally to all God's people, Jew and non-Jew. Okay, that's where they were. Let's keep going and show that they are still there with new stuff. Number 1, from number 1 on the bibliography, it's the 5th quote. We strive to be like Jesus in everything we do, which includes observing Jewish tradition. Again, we want to be like Jesus, right? That is a good thing. Nobody wants to poo-poo the idea of being like Jesus. But does that mean we have to live like a first century Jew? Because let's be honest, Judaism of today is not the Judaism of 2,000 years ago. It has evolved and changed in its practices and its beliefs in the way that it is done, just like Christianity has. So they're talking about doing this, going back to the first century, again, as well as can be recreated, and living that way. Number 6, and we'll see this one again. If they truly love him, they must keep his commandments, including what he said about the unchanging Torah. So, does that sound like you have permission? If you really love Jesus, you'll do it. Which kind of is a hint. We'll leave that hanging in the air. If you don't want to do it, hey, answers our question about whether you really love Jesus or not, doesn't it? Now again, that wouldn't be the first time someone in the church has said in church history, you must do X, Y, and Z or you don't really love Jesus, and put in their own tradition, their own understanding there. That's an issue. We've seen it before in church history, but again, here's a new example of it. Are you being given permission and an opportunity when they say if you really love Jesus? Or is that a mandate and a warning? I have my answer. I think you'll have the same one. And this is a quote from one of their Bible studies. Their Bible study in the Gospel of John. It says, the Master, of course Jesus, binds the commandments, judgments, ordinances, and statutes of the Torah upon his disciples with the cords of love. He taught them to observe even the least of the Torah's commandments. All of Yeshua's teachings were explanations and interpretations of his Father's commandments. The Apostle John understood the equation, and he explained that every disciple of Yeshua is obligated by love for God to walk in obedience to Torah. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. That's 1 John 5:3. We've got an issue here. We're conflating things, all right? At the first, they were talking about how Jesus taught his disciples. Who were Jesus' disciples? They were Jews living under the old covenant because he had not yet established the new covenant, because he had not yet gone to the cross. He would establish the new covenant in his blood, but until then, they were to live in obedience to the law of Moses, just as he was. And they're taking that and saying that's what 1 John is about. When John writes his letter decades later and he uses the word commandment, just read it like he's using the word Torah. Because, of course, that's not what 1 John 5:3 is talking about. Read the letter of 1 John when you get to chapter 5, and he says, "For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments." He's not thinking about dietary laws and Sabbath keeping. That's not the context of 1 John. Notice also that you've been told that Jesus has bound Torah upon you. That sounds pretty strong. All right? Again, conflating what he told his disciples with what every Gentile in every generation after that is supposed to do. That's it's like a bait and switch. Okay? Here's another one. Only those who subject themselves to the authority of the Master's teaching and his Torah enter into the union of his love and the love of God. Anybody having a problem seeing what they're saying? I don't think we're mincing words here, right? If you do not take the yoke of Torah upon yourself, I'll just say it, you remain eternally damned. That's what that means, right? If you do not enter into the union of the love of God, you're damned. You don't have to spell that out. I can figure it out. That's what that means. When was this published? 2022. So if you say, well, we were a little more radical back then. We've softened. We've come to a better understanding. Well, you published this last year, right? That one law mandate that they said they walked away from when they fired Timothy Hegg, or amicably split with Timothy Hegg, depending on how you read that. There it is. It hasn't gone anywhere. One more and then we'll pause. If Gentile believers see the importance of keeping a biblical diet in order to maintain their identity as a participant in the holy nation, why should they be discouraged? After all, Yeshua kept kosher. Okay, let's start with that Yeshua kept kosher nonsense. That is a cheap tactic. That is not the way to build an argument. Jesus kept kosher. What's your problem? All right, that's a guilt trip. That's a pretty cheap thing to do when you're an organization who, as we will see as we go into the video quotes, believes that the church has been falsely teaching the gospel for 2,000 years. And you're going to say, hey, Yeshua did it. I mean, come on. We can do better than that. We can actually look at the text and try to make an argument. But notice this, in order to maintain. If you don't want to maintain your salvation by faith, through grace, right? They say that on their publication, salvation is by grace through faith. And then they say something like this, if you don't keep kosher, if you don't keep a biblical diet, you're not going to maintain it. Well, suddenly faith and grace went out the window because if I don't do this, I'm out. What does it mean to maintain your identity as a participant in the holy nation? I don't know what that means, but that is not the theology that I understand about our eternal security, that it hinges upon whether or not we do X, Y, and Z like that. So, all right, let's stop for a minute. Questions about this section where they're talking about what you've got to do in order to be a real follower of Jesus?
Do they say what do they think of Acts where he
We will get into Acts. We have some examples from the book of Acts. Again, when you look at Acts, when you look at Galatians, when you look at Hebrews, their explanation is the opposite of what you've ever been taught by Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant theologians. It's the opposite. If we read it and we say, this is saying that we're not supposed to observe the law because we're under grace, they're going to flip it around and say that's the opposite. And you have to dig through their stuff in order to really get the flow of that thought. But I've seen that many a time here. Every one of those examples that you could give or I could give, and you say, what about this? What about that? All of them can be explained. All of them can be discounted or reinterpreted or whatever. So yes, I would say, what about Peter and Cornelius? What about Paul opposing Peter to his face? What about, and none of it's going to get through this system. Yes? Oh, I forgot to repeat your question. I'm sorry, the people might not have heard that, so I'll repeat his. You were loud, maybe they did.
I don't seem to understand why you're getting so tore up about this.
Okay.
I've gone through these classes.
Okay.
My uncle taught this in our Sunday school class in Wyoming.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's all it is. It doesn't say if you want to be a real Christian, you have to do it this way. And
so
there's other things in the Bible that don't say the phrases that we know now because it was written in different languages. And a lot of these things you're saying about the Torah class and things like that aren't true. I don't know where you're getting your information. But
okay. So let me pause because nobody on here can hear your question. You're saying, why are we worked up about this? This isn't what the Torah clubs really are. Is that in essence what you're saying? You're saying, why is this bothering me in the ministerium? Oh, because this isn't what the Torah clubs really teach. Okay. Every single thing here is a direct quote from Boaz, Michael, and Lancaster. Okay.
Don't teach this.
Then they're ignoring the materials that they're paying for, because this is what the membership dues is giving, are these materials. I took every single quote from a published First Fruits of Zion source. I kid you not. The bibliography is at the back of the page. You can look every single one of them up and read them for yourself. The quotes are long so that you see the context. I don't want to be the one that just pulls out a snippet. Our position as a ministerium is that this theological position will poison the eventual outcome of this study. Even if 90% or 95% of the material is orthodox, the founders, the people in charge of this organization believe that the only way for the church to fulfill its mission is if we all live like Jews. They absolutely believe that. I will show, if we get that far tonight, if not tonight, then next week, I will show the founder and the publisher of these materials saying these things on video in 2022 at the Malchut conference. The conference for the insiders and the donors. I've watched the videos. I've read the transcripts. This is what they believe. Now, again, we made. I know you weren't here last week. I started with this last week. Not everything that the Watchtower Tract Society publishes is unorthodox. But because they are the ones behind it, I would never encourage a Christian Sunday school Bible study group to use their published materials. Because I know they don't believe that Jesus is God. And that's going to be in there somewhere.
You know, the Torah classes I've been to don't teach that at all.
Don't teach? No. Well, again, last week we had some quotes that were throwing some cold water on the Trinity from things that were published just recently in their book, Rethinking the Five Solae. So we can have this talk more later if you want. Listen to all the rest of the information we have. Again, I will be happy. I will be encouraged insofar as local Torah clubs are ignoring what First Fruits of Zion is telling them to teach. But as a minister, as someone who is ordained, someone who took vows, I cannot sit back and say, they won't teach it. It'll be fine, right? Don't worry about it. That's not the way it works. Again, the Latter-day Saints and their publications, some of that is Orthodox, but I know they don't believe in Orthodox Christianity. It's the same thing. And again, we will show, when we get to that they don't believe that the gospel as it was preached for the last 2,000 years is real. No, First Fruits of Zion. They don't believe it. And Boaz Michael will say it. He will say the church for 2,000 years has had a substandard, ineffective gospel. And only we know more. Only we have the answer. Again, I'm stealing my own thunder because it'll hit you harder when he says it. Because he's the founder and he's the president. He's the driving force behind this. It's not some guy out in left field, right? If we were talking about the Catholic Church and all I was quoting was some priest somewhere, or even a bishop somewhere, we could say, well, obviously that he's not towing the line. But this is the head. This is their version of the Pope. This is a guy at the top of the totem pole, right? He has all of the power and all of the influence. All right. I appreciate your comment, and in as much as that is true here locally, I will be happy. Yes?
Is there a structure with this group? Is there training, certain qualifications to be a head of a club?
Yeah, I don't know the inner workings of that as far as how much goes into becoming a Torah club leader. I would have to pretend to want to be one in order to find that, and I'm not going to do that.
Have you actually been to one of these clubs?
No.
Yeah. You see, there's where you're kind of lopsided.
Okay. I've read hundreds of pages of their material.
I don't know who this character is, and I never heard of him before this.
Well, then maybe the Torah club that you've been to is not associated with First Fruits of Zion. It's a common term.
My question leads to that.
Right.
People that are starting clubs, are they trained
So
from this God?
the Hebrew Roots movement is a wide movement. There are a number of organizations that call what they're doing a Torah club that aren't associated with First Fruits of Zion. Well, this is the guy, and these are the publications that are happening here in this county. Every one of the Torah clubs in this county, to my knowledge, at least all the ones that we've known about, that we've talked to, and I know the leaders of, and we've interacted with as a ministerium, they are getting their materials from First Fruits of Zion. That is the information that we have. I mentioned this last week. It's okay to recap for this. As a ministerium, we reached out and we said, will you come and talk to us about these things that we have? I had an earlier version of this big 26-page document back when it was only like 8 pages, because it was a long time ago. And they said no. They said, we already know your objections and we don't want to meet with you. I said, okay. So and we published this in February. These are our objections. There has been no attempt to say we don't believe those. There has been no attempt to say we disavow that teaching from First Fruits of Zion. And if they did, we would say thank you. That's what we are hoping for.
Did you reach out to the local one here?
Yes. Yes. We absolutely did. And that was not... the choice was made to not engage with the ministerium for whatever it is. We also chose not to argue with them on social media, and they chose the same response, which I appreciate because that is not a useful way to go into something like this, right? Facebook comments and Twitter comments are not how you get anything solved. So let me continue with the presentation. I will continue to show the material. And again, in as much as these teachings are being ignored locally, great. But they are right now teaching the Ha-Yashad workbook. I know they are because they publicized it and said, we're starting new classes. And this workbook is every time you see a number 8, like this one right here, that's from their workbook right now. So that was taught this year locally. Unless they said when they got to this passage, and there are about 100 of them in this workbook, forget this. Every other page, forget that. Flip the next page. Don't ignore this, right? If your Bible study material is that off, then use something else. All right? All right. Please, let me continue with the next one. I appreciate your viewpoint, and again, I hope that there is more truth in what you're saying than the evidence that we have seen. I hope it is, because that would make me very happy in all of the ministerium. The next one, that the good works of the new covenant and the purpose of the sending of the Spirit at Pentecost is to enable Jesus' followers to more fully keep the Mosaic law. Why did the Holy Spirit come at Pentecost? They believe it's because that's the opportunity for God's people to really keep Torah. Again, in this, we see the word Torah put into the New Testament all over the place. Instead of law or commandment, we just insert it. Sometimes the author is talking about the law of Moses. Most of the time, the author is not. You can't just do that. That's not the way translations work. So let's look at the quote. First Fruits of Zion teaches a different message, but many of the results are the same. We teach the believer's identity in Messiah gives him the right and responsibility to, quote unquote, take hold of the commandments of God. The observance of the Sabbath, the biblical festivals, the biblical dietary laws, and the lifestyle of Torah becomes incumbent upon us because we have been created in Messiah Yeshua for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them. You recognize Ephesians 2:10 there. What are the good works in their mind that God prepared in advance for the followers of Jesus to do? Keep Torah. That's what he just said. But again, if you read Ephesians, you read chapter 2 of Ephesians, that's not what Paul is talking about. He has not defined those good works specifically as keeping Torah. But if you insert that in there, then people might believe that. Secondly, this is a short one. We've only got 3 examples of this one. This is from the local Torah club leader. Interestingly, the new covenant and the giving of the Spirit at Pentecost is to help us keep Torah. That was part of a locally created explanation of teaching material. And then one more from the workbook. When we keep the Torah, we allow Messiah to live through us. He is righteousness, and Torah is the standard of righteousness. He is the law fulfilled, and he desires to fulfill it through us. Questions? I don't have a lot of examples of this one because it's not something they bring up very often comparative to these other issues. But the idea that the Spirit's job is to help you keep Torah, and that's why he came at Pentecost. Yes?
And I think you referred to it, but earlier, they just insert Torah.
Correct.
I mean, it was about commandments.
Right.
Commandments, and then they inserted Torah.
Right. So yes, and this is one of the conclusions of the Ministerium was that the quality of the exegesis, the quality of the interpretation of biblical texts being done by First Fruits of Zion was very substandard. Again, they know a ton about Judaism and ancient Israel, but when it comes to reading a text, understanding it in its context, and applying it to the audience today, the methods that they are using are not what are taught at any seminary. This is not the way that these things are done. And anytime, again, there are lots of organizations that have what we would call a substandard hermeneutic. They don't know how to read and apply the scriptures. That is a common problem, unfortunately, in church history and in the church in the world today. This is an example of that when you put the word Torah in where it's convenient. Again, other organizations do similar things. The best example, the most well-known example is in John 1, where the Jehovah's Witnesses say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a God. And they use the indefinite article there to indicate that they believe Jesus isn't God. All right, that is not how Greek works. That's not a proper translation of English, but there it is. And we have identified, again, a number of examples of where that kind of thing is happening with First Fruits of Zion. Again, sloppy interpretive techniques alone would not have made the Ministerium sit up and take notice, because we could find other examples of that. All right, I could go to the bookstore and go to the Christian book section and find plenty of books where I'm like, oh, this guy is not very good at understanding and interpreting Scripture. But once your interpretation that's not very good lands you outside of orthodoxy, then I have an issue. Then I say, wait a minute, this is where it's going. Yep.
Was it a local group that you attended? Did you say it was a local Torah club that you attended
Okay.
in this county?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
In this county is what she was asking.
It's in Franklin.
Okay. Again, and as we have, there is a pattern in this where it starts with study, which is great, and then it develops and it develops and it develops, and eventually we start to see people leave the fellowship of their church. Eventually we start to see arguments within churches. Eventually we start to see pastors being confronted and saying, why aren't you teaching this? Why are you lying to me? That kind of thing. We start to see that, and I have examples of that from other locales where people have told me about it. And let's look at the next one, because this starts to show us that sloppy understanding of history. All right? That the practice of the early church through the entirety of the apostolic generation was a form of Judaism, complete with observance of the Mosaic law by Gentiles, and that this was in keeping with the desire of the apostles in the Jerusalem Council. In other words, the entirety of the New Testament are people keeping Torah as part of Judaism, and that's exactly what James and the council wanted. That's what they're going to demonstrate in the quotes I will show you here. All right? What they're doing is focusing on the first few years of the early church, who were the followers of Jesus? Jews who were raised under the Old Covenant, most of them living in and around Jerusalem. And so obviously they are living differently than those who came after them. They view that first half of that first generation, actually it's probably about a quarter of that generation, as normative for everyone. That's what we all must do, go back to that moment in time and freeze it there. All right, ignoring the fact that in the book of Acts, the early church can be seen to wrestle with this issue. How do we include the Gentiles who are being saved apart from the law? They have no knowledge of the law, and yet they are accepting the gospel. What do we do with them? All right, and the church adapts with the Jerusalem Council to the situation because they realize God's grace is far greater than our imagination first understood. Let's take a look at the quotes. The majority of people, this is from Lancaster's synagogue. Last week I said it was in Minnesota. Somebody told me that they've moved to Wisconsin. I don't know. I didn't try to nail that down, but this is their belief statement. The majority of people in attendance at Beth Emmanuel are not Jewish. Most of us are Gentile Christians who found spiritual significance in a traditional Jewish expression of our faith as we emulate the earliest form of Christianity. We feel called to follow the Jewish calendar, celebrate the weekly Sabbath, enjoy the Jewish holidays, and participate in synagogue liturgical tradition. So again, the emphasis is on this is what we did first. This is what the followers of Jesus did first. Therefore, this is what we all must do now. Again, first few chapters of Acts, and that's it. Here's another quote from Beth Emmanuel. The earliest form of Christianity, the Christianity of the apostolic era, was a messianic sectarian movement within greater first century Judaism. Now, if we stopped right there and the only thing they were talking about was the first few years of the church, that would be true. But they're going to branch that out and make it sound as if that was the entirety of the apostolic era. Let's look at this next sentence. More than 100 years after the life of Yeshua of Nazareth. That's after the death of all the apostles, right? The explosive growth of Gentile Christianity eclipsed the early Messianic sect of Judaism he had founded. Many Jewish and Gentile Christians discarded the distinctly Jewish practices of the Torah as they assimilated into the evolving Gentile religious environment. The original biblical faith and practice of Yeshua and his first disciples faded into obscurity. Now, the problem with this statement is that it's just not true. That is not church history. All right? The early church was dealing with the questions of Gentile inclusion in the very first generation. Paul is writing about this topic extensively. The book of Acts deals with this topic extensively. It's not more than 100 years later, unless you think that all of Paul's writings were fake and he didn't write them, which I haven't heard them say that. I think they believe the actual Apostle Paul wrote what we put his name to. So how is this 100 years later business? Where is this coming from? Paul was dealing with this. The Jerusalem Council is dealing with this. And the biblical text itself of the New Testament explains how the Gentiles were included, on what basis, and how that all fit together. It was not decided later. It's in the text. The apostles were directing it. What we see in the New Testament is not against their wishes, it is their wishes. That's what they wanted to happen. Right? It's not like James got his arm twisted at the Council of Jerusalem and lost the argument. Who stood up at the Council of Jerusalem to say, we need to do this? It was Peter. Peter said, I've seen these Gentiles with my own eyes coming to faith in Jesus. All right, let's keep going. Let's see another one. In the days of the New Testament, Jewish and Gentile believers in Jesus worshiped together as co-religionists, participating together in the prayers, rituals, expressions, and customs of daily Jewish life. They understood the person and teaching of Yeshua from within the context of Judaism and the Torah worldview. Now, that is a very bold statement, that all of the Gentile believers in the New Testament are worshiping within Judaism. There's just one problem. We don't have evidence of that in history and in the New Testament. What happens in town after town to the Apostle Paul when he speaks of Jesus crucified and risen in the synagogue? 9 times out of 10, they chase him out of there. A couple times they try to kill him. You would have us believe that the newly formed church, which is not really a church, obviously you don't like the word church, but you would have us believe that they are worshiping in the synagogue with Jews who don't believe in Jesus? How did that work? How could that have possibly been what they were doing in the New Testament era? Again, we're not talking about the church in Jerusalem where everyone is a Jew. We're talking about the church in Ephesus and Corinth and Rome where maybe 10% of the people are Jewish. If that. We don't have statistics because, of course, what ancient statistic is accurate? We don't know. But it wasn't a majority. You see that in the writings of Paul. You see it in the book of Acts. But church history is ignored deeply, especially early church history, by this organization. A few more in this section. According to the apostles, Gentile believers are not required to keep the distinctive commandments of Jewish identity, such as circumcision, Sabbath, the dietary laws, etc. If only you stop there. Because that's true. Nevertheless, God-fearing Gentile disciples in fellowship with those early Jewish believers naturally participated in the Sabbath, synagogue, and Jewish life along with the Jewish community of faith. Once again, we're conflating things. We're taking two things and mushing them together because you're quoting to me at the end of that quote, Acts 15, 19 to 21 about the Jerusalem Council. The God-fearers were a group of Gentiles who were participating in the synagogues before the time of Christ. So that when Paul went to a synagogue there in Asia Minor, in Greece, in Italy, yes, there were some Gentiles there, a few, in most synagogues. And they were naturally participating in what was happening. But when the Jerusalem Council makes its decision and sends its letter, it's not talking to God-fearers. That's what they were known as, the God-fearers. That's not who it was written to. It was written to people who were previously living as pagans and warning them, these are the things that if you do them, Jews will be offended, so please don't. I know your former culture said they were okay, but please don't, because it's just going to cause fights with either the Jewish Christians or the non-Christian Jews. Either way, it's going to cause fights. Please don't do it. That's what Acts 15, those verses, is about. And I see this all the time. Someone makes an argument and puts a Bible verse at the end of it. And the Bible verse has nothing to do with what you just said. That doesn't help. That doesn't strengthen the argument. Just putting verses after that. One of my professors in college referred to that as being like a gunslinger, just going pow, 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 with your references, right? Just indiscriminately shooting out, Acts, Galatians, Romans. And people will read and say, oh, look at all the Bible verses. How many of you stop and read every time you see one of those Bible verses and read it to see if the context is being respected? If that's the flow of thought of the author. Again, it makes it hard to actually get through a book when you do that. And most of the time we can trust if we know the source. But this is what's happening. This is from, again, the workbook that's being used right now. The newest, I think my edition that I have there is from 2020 that I took it from. Paul has thus wrongly, I believe, been seen as disregarding the law and customs of his Jewish past as he developed entirely new Christian solutions. He has mistakenly been made the creator of a Gentile Christianity that rejected Judaism and the law as operative, rather than the champion of the restoration of Israel who fought for the inclusion of, quote-unquote, righteous Gentiles in this new community as equals, as understood by James and the council. This is a long quote in the book from a man named Mark Nanos, from a book he wrote called The Mystery of Romans. I've got no problem with the fact that he wrote a book about Romans, but Mark Nanos is not a Christian. I looked him up, I found out about him because I was like, this is interesting, let me see what this guy has to say. He's not. So his insights are coming from a non-Christian perspective. So I take with a grain of salt the fact that he says, everybody, all you Christians misunderstand Paul. I also take with a grain of salt because his understanding of Paul is different than the last 2,000 years worth of understanding of Paul. So that's another strike against it. Paul has been mistakenly looked at as the creator of Gentile Christianity. In other words, because of course they believe he didn't want to do that. He had no intention of doing that. And one more from the workbook, actually a couple more coming. The next one. Many believers today might consider living in obedience to God's commandments, that's Torah, if not for the writings of Paul. It's widely believed that Paul discouraged believers from practicing Torah and that he warned us from going under the law and falling from grace. But if that is really true, then Paul's writings hopelessly contradict what we know about Paul himself. This week, we'll examine a sampling of Pauline passages that have traditionally been interpreted as anti-Torah and anti-Jewish, which, again, we'll leave that second one. That's not entirely accurate. We hope that we will be able to unravel these misunderstood passages to discover the true message of the Apostle Paul. So, in other words, everything Paul wrote that you think is saying that we are not under Torah, we're under grace, or that the law has been fulfilled and the new covenant has replaced it, etc., etc. Everything that you read from Paul, they say it contradicts the real Paul, the man Paul, and therefore that understanding can't be right. I'll show you where they think they have the proof of that in a minute, and why that's not what they think it is. Excuse me for a minute. So in other words, this is a big part of the publications of First Fruits of Zion. Paul is misunderstood and has to be reinterpreted. Whoops. Let's look at the next one, and this is where they believe they have that. There is really no way around Acts 21. Paul meant to pay for the Nazarites to demonstrate that he lived in obedience to Torah and never taught contrary to Torah observance. Any seemingly contradictory statements from his epistles must be weighed against Acts 21. I'm calling this a house of cards because they are rejecting what the church has taught about Paul for basically the entirety of church history based on Acts 21. What's happening in Acts 21? In Acts 21, Paul is returning to Jerusalem, and the Jewish Christians living in Jerusalem say, Paul, people here are in an uproar because of all your work with the Gentiles. You need to do something to keep a riot from happening. By the way, it didn't work because the riot still happened. He got arrested and eventually ended up dead in Rome. So what did they tell him to do? Go pay for the fulfillment of the Nazarite vows of these gentlemen so that everyone will see that you're not the enemy of Judaism. All right? It was about peace in Jerusalem. It was not Paul saying, I want every Gentile throughout history from this day forward to follow Torah. That's taking a molehill and making it a mountain. Taking a moment when Paul was doing something for the sake of peace for the Jerusalem church and saying everything else that he wrote now has to be viewed through that lens. Again, Paul is doing something for expediency, to keep his fellow brothers and sisters in Christ from being persecuted, to keep Jerusalem from going up like a tinderbox, which again, he knew it was, because this is not long before Jerusalem is in open revolt and gets itself wiped out by the Romans. So he doesn't want to start fights in the streets. But First Fruits of Zion believes, but because of that moment, you have to reinterpret everything Paul wrote in his epistles. Notice that, seemingly contrary. Apparently they're not. Stop for a minute and let that sink in. Further questions, further ideas. In theory, we may even get as far as I hope tonight. We'll see. That's my constant theme. I'm always behind work. Any new questions? Okay, so what we're dealing with here is a very different view of the early church. What was it like? What did the apostles want it to be? What was the Jerusalem council? Who was Paul? All of those things are being viewed differently. And frankly, here's where we start to get into some serious questions. We see, and we will have videos that go into this more later. This is a sort of a preview of that. A hostility toward the history of the church predicated on the notion that the church has always been in error, and I see a little bit of quotes here and there like it's the church is lying to you rather than just in error. That's two sides of the same coin. Only this movement has the truth of God. They're embracing the realization that they stand outside of historic orthodoxy in the flow of church history. But that's actually, and I've seen this more and more, that's a selling point. We're not like them. We're not following in their footsteps. That's a part of the advertising, as it were. Let's take a look at the quotes and you'll see. Messianic Judaism rediscovered an authenticity deeper and older than any form of structure existing within the mainstream church. Torah. Suddenly, it wasn't primarily Jews coming into the movement, rather it was Christians, Gentile Christians who've been starved for authenticity for centuries. Gentile Christians hungry and zealous for Torah. So the modern Messianic Jewish movement does have more Gentiles participating than Jews. At a lot of the synagogues where Jewish people who believe in Jesus are worshiping in a liturgical style that is reminiscent of the synagogue, a lot of the people who show up there are Gentiles. And they're right in that. But notice how they describe it. Christians who were starved for authenticity for centuries. Here's the next one. Suddenly, Gentile Christians everywhere are responding, yes, this is what my faith has been missing. This is what I've always been looking for. What you were raised with, what you inherited as a tradition, whether that's Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant, you now realize that it was missing something because now you're part of the Messianic movement, is what they're saying. That's what people are telling them. And I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that a lot of people feel that way, that they've rediscovered something, that they've found something. Let's keep going. And this is, again, from the local leadership. Rest assured, we're working on this issue in our study, little by little, chipping away doctrines of men and replacing it with the scriptures themselves. Please be patient. I found that to be jarring, to come out and say, we're working on it. We're getting rid of the church stuff bit by bit. Eventually, we'll get where we need to go. This is an introduction to the workbook. We're on a mission to restore the original faith and practice of the apostles and first followers of Jesus of Nazareth. We rejoice in our rootedness in Judaism as well as our relationship with Christianity. I get where they say the original faith and practice. They're talking about the first few years in Jerusalem when with almost everyone who followed Jesus was Jewish. But notice that we're rooted in Judaism, but we've got a relationship with Christianity. What does that mean? They didn't say we're rooted in Judaism and Christianity. We're in one, we're with the other. That seems deliberate. If that is just prepositions that happen to fall into the sentence, they're not helpful ones. And this is a quote from, I don't have videos of all the quotes from the conference. I've got about 12 minutes worth that will spread out through this. This is from the conference. The responsibility of this message falls on us, a small minority of God's people who've come to an understanding of the gospel of the kingdom and whose lives are being transformed by the undiluted power of Yeshua's message. And we're called to take this gospel of reading it right. And we're called to take this gospel message to the kingdoms. Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. And this prophetic movement has only become possible in our generation. It's our responsibility. Two things there. We've got the undiluted power of the message. In other words, everybody else is diluted, right? Also, this is the very first generation. Again, anytime an organization tells you that they alone have the answers, that they have a corner on the market on truth, you should be worried about that. Why has no one else been able to find it? Where has it been the last 2,000 years that just now you've uncovered it? That's problematic. Here's another. Until the gospel of the kingdom, the original authentic message of Yeshua, has been proclaimed to the ends of the earth, the partial hardening of Israel will continue. Notice again, they have the original authentic message, which means people who disagree with them, the church, the majority of the church for its history, has not had the original, has only had an inauthentic message, and we will see them say that. But notice, they believe that their work is going to bring about the end times and bring the Jewish people to Jesus. Their work. Again, this organization and its leaders have a huge belief in their purpose, that they are going to be the ones responsible for all of this, which is a big deal. Our eyes have been opened to the reality of the kingdom. We're standing on that summit and we see far off in the distance. And we wonder why other people don't see or share our same perspective. Seems like it's an inspiring idea to know the authentic Jesus. So how do they describe themselves? Standing on the mountaintop, seeing in the distance. Why won't the rest of you join us in seeing this? Now, I have an answer to that. You're not really on the mountaintop seeing things clearly and everyone else is in darkness. That's what the problem is. We don't see it because it's not there to be seen. We don't see it because for 2,000 years the church has taught other than this. Maybe being all by yourself and saying we're the only ones who see this should be a warning. Last one in this section. Until then, however, there's a small remnant, right? It's a pretty small remnant of the kingdom on earth. There's a few of us. There's a few of us clinging to the commandments and the testimony of Yeshua, as it says in the book of Revelation. So let me say this. If you are part of a movement that says the vast majority of the people of the church now and in history are false, run. Because that is not the church triumphant that Jesus proclaimed, right? The gates of hell will not overcome it, he says. And they say, there's just a few of us, and we're the only ones. We're the tiny remnant. Again, other groups are saying the same thing. The Jehovah's Witnesses believe that. We're the only 144,000. We're the only ones that are pure. They're saying the exact same thing. We're the true remnant. All right? And again, to show you that I apply this denouncement eagerly, I ripped into John MacArthur for saying stuff like this. That the vast majority of the people in the world today who call upon Jesus as Lord are damned because they don't believe right. No. I cannot justify that. I cannot see how that fits with my theology of the church. That the Spirit is at work amongst us, that God has given the church power and the gospel power. How could it be so ineffective? How could it be so weak and futile? Only if it were a thing of man, right? Only if it were not God's will. And in which case we got a whole lot of bigger problems than this. Stop for a minute. Questions, comments, thoughts. I've got more on this subject. It'll be the last section of direct quotes. We probably won't get to it tonight. It'll probably start next week. Well, let's keep going because I want to get to slide 125, and we're at 91 with 45 minutes to go, and the Steelers start at 8, so I'm not allowed to go over tonight. Although, as we all know, the game won't start till like 20 after, right? You're only missing commercials. All right, the next one. This is a small one, but it's meaningful. That Sabbath worship was the practice of the early church, something not changed until Constantine. So much of the doctrine of the Hebrew roots movement, I've seen this in a number of other sources, and First Fruits of Zion in particular, are built on ignorance or willful blindness about church history. Their version of church history is not what we understand it from the books, from the sources, from our knowledge. And this is a conspiracy theory. This is one that as you see who they think the culprit is, you'll be like, oh, I've heard them as the culprit on other occasions as well. Here it is. Constantine and the Catholic Church. They're the villains. Again, Dan Brown is proud, right? Constantine and the Catholic Church. They're the ones that screwed it up. Now, I'm not going to read this whole quote for brevity of time. I'll leave it up there. Basically, this is from the local Torah club leader, trying to make the argument that Constantine changed how Sunday was observed. And there is some truth to that, because once Christianity became legal and then eventually became the official religion of the empire, the way in which Sunday was observed did change. Because you were no longer a persecuted minority, you could actually start saying, well, let's observe this as a day of rest, etc., etc. So there is some truth to that. But to say that the early church worshiped exclusively on Saturday until Constantine is nonsense. That is not what you see in the New Testament text, because the Apostle Paul is writing about worship on the Lord's Day, which is Sunday, the day of the resurrection, in the New Testament. And obviously they were doing that at the time that they were a persecuted minority, not when they had power in their hands. So for centuries the church was using Sunday as its day of worship. But when you can paint the Pope and the Vatican as the boogeyman and Constantine, that happens. People do that. Again, it's anachronistic. By the way, there was no Vatican, there was no papacy in any real way when Constantine came to power. The Bishop of Rome was just one among many at that time. So to say that this this nefarious Catholic Church did it, that's just Catholic bigotry. That's just saying, I know that the Catholics are the boogeyman that some people will believe. And you see that kind of stuff a lot, where people in early church history are talking about the Catholic Church like it's this organized thing. And in the 2nd century, the 3rd century, the 4th century, that's just not the way it was. There was one church then, and a whole bunch of bishops, right, working more or less together, figuring things out, but there was no quote-unquote Catholic Church making decisions. It's just not the way it worked. People have arguments about that, about the canon of Scripture and other issues as well. It's just not history. One more. The New Testament contains no specific commandments concerning the nature, place, or time that God desires for corporate worship. I'm with you so far. There is no commandment to assemble on Sunday morning or any other day of the week. The Torah, on the other hand, contains ample instruction about God's appointed times of worship. In the faith and practice of the apostolic community, believers followed the biblical calendar, kept the seventh-day Sabbath, and worshiped God at his appointed times. Again, you start with something that's true. The New Testament doesn't really talk about the when and where and how of worship. It shows what they were doing, but Paul doesn't spend a lot of time talking about that, of course, about what we must do. He just talks about what is. But notice the way the Jerusalem-only or Jewish-only Jerusalem church worshiped is not the way the entirety of the church worshiped for the whole apostolic generation. That's just not true. They were not keeping kosher and celebrating the Sabbath and the festivals at the church in Corinth and the church in Ephesus and the church at Thessalonica and all the rest of them. There's no evidence of that. But that's what they would have us understand. If the early church for the whole apostolic generation was doing this, then it must be good for us. But the whole apostolic generation of the first church, the whole early church, first generation, was not doing this. In one area, for one period of time, they were, but as the Gentiles came into the church, they realized something is afoot. God's up to something. Peter and Cornelius, Paul opposing Peter to his face, the Jerusalem council, boom, 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 you get all that, right? And then the whole issue, right? Don't let yourself be circumcised or you're under the law, et cetera, in Galatians. I mean, this whole idea that this was the early church and a century later, or Constantine later, which is a lot later, they changed it all. Where's the proof of that? Where's the evidence? Where are the early church fathers arguing and saying, hey, wait a minute, why are we changing and not keeping kosher anymore? Crickets. All right? I have this exact same objection to the way Bart Ehrman, who is an apostate, the way he attacks the accuracy of the New Testament text. He does it by arguments from silence. This was changed, and that was changed, and this was added. Where's the proof? Oh, it doesn't exist. Then I'm not going to believe it. Again, and that's my History of the Bible one. So again, all sorts of free advertisements woven into this. If you want to learn more about that topic, I've got 6 hours on that and talk about good old Bart for about 15 minutes. Those of you who know his work know what I mean. So let's pause for a moment there. We've got one more short one, and then we're getting to the videos. And I know I've hyped them up, so. Any questions about Sunday worship versus Saturday worship? Again, when did this become an issue for the church? Way back with the Millerites, right? With the great disappointment and the people saying Jesus didn't come back, wonder why? Because we weren't keeping the Sabbath. And that beginning in the 19th century is where you see this come back around. All right, eschatology, everybody's favorite topic, the end times. They have an eschatology that awaits the rebuilding of the temple, complete with a Levitical priesthood and sacrificial system where the whole world will obey Torah and the millennial kingdom. Anytime you base a movement on your understanding of the end times, be careful. Because if you're wrong, then you got something really wrong. And that's what we're going to see here. Let's look at the quotes. We believe there's a Jewish man who's taken up residence within each and every believer. The more one gets in touch with this inner Jew, i.e. Yeshua, the more one will feel compelled to turn to the ways of Torah and identify with the people of Israel. So far, that's what we've been saying about being mandated and compelled, right? Here's the quote about the end times. The non-Jewish call to Torah is part of biblical prophecy too. In the Messianic era, all nations will be keeping the Torah. And I mentioned this before, it's not Jesus as an inner Jew living in each of us, it's the Holy Spirit. If they weren't calling us all to obey in Torah, I wouldn't be bent out of shape about that. I would just be curious as to why they're being sloppy. But there's the statement. In the end times, in the Messianic kingdom, the whole world is keeping Torah. This is basically the same thing. In the Messianic era, Israel will walk in covenant fidelity, observing God's commandments and statutes. The whole world will live according to the Torah. But let me ask this question. If Torah is coming back in the Messianic kingdom and complete with a priesthood and all of the sacrifices in the law of Moses, what is the purpose of a sacrifice for sin after Jesus? What possible need could there be for a sacrifice for sin? And if you're saying to me, well, those ones are set aside. No, you can't say that parts of Torah are set aside and not, but the rest of it has to be forever. Either it's meant for all people, in all places, in all times, and cannot be changed even by Jesus, as they've contended, and we've shown you the quotes, or it can be changed, in which case your 10-layer house of cards just fell down. Why on earth why are there sacrifices on the altar after Jesus? Not sacrifices of thanksgiving, not sacrifices of fellowship, sacrifices for sins. They're in the law of Moses. You can't set them aside unless the law of Moses can be changed. See the problem? But they believe in the millennial kingdom. All of it's coming back exactly as it was. 3, the work of preparing for the final redemption requires the restoration of a Jewish Messiah, a Jewish gospel, a Jewish concept of discipleship, and a Jewish understanding of Torah. That's from the workbook. The church needs to be Torah observant and within Judaism if we're going to have the end times. The preparing for the final redemption. If Jesus is coming back, we've got to make this happen. That's their understanding. And again, a quote like this is why I took such great pains at the very beginning to say none of what I'm talking about here has anything to do with Jews or Judaism. This group is all Gentiles, and they are not affiliated with Judaism, and they are not affiliated with Messianic Jews. Not officially. Again, none of those organizations accept this understanding. But they're saying that we have to have a Jewish gospel. What's that? How is that different? A Jewish discipleship. Now that might be interesting. Study what discipleship meant to a first century Jew. I'd like to know that. That's a start with something interesting, something useful, but then we're taking it to a place that we can't sustain. We'll stop there, and we've got a half an hour for the next one, and that'll be just about right because it's 26 slides long and it's got about 4 videos. It'll be a great way to end because this last one is big. It's the next to last part of the description of the organization before we get into church history and before we get into the response next week. Questions on the end times, not please don't ask me questions about the end times. Questions about what they think about the end times. You almost had me. I almost opened myself up to that. I know better. Yes?
I think it's Ezekiel that does talk about the millennial temple and sacrifices happening in millennial.
Right.
So how does that? I've always wondered, even before Torah, how does that fit in?
That is an excellent question. How do the prophecies of Ezekiel and the rest about the restoration of Israel, how does that work? I'm not entirely sure, but I know it's not Torah exactly as it was before, because Jesus has changed things, right? The book of Hebrews, he is the great high priest. He has made one sacrifice for sin and no sacrifices left. All right, and so what exactly will that new temple look like? Exactly what will happen there? I don't know. But I know it's not this. Because that understanding of those prophecies, again, we're talking about how do you understand prophecy? And that's a dangerous thing. Because the prophets of old looked at what the Messiah would be, and they didn't get it right. Because it was a very difficult understanding of those prophecies, right? That he would come and suffer and die. That was hard. And so, again, I don't know what the Messianic kingdom is going to look like exactly, but I know it's not going to have sacrifices for sin, so it's not going to have the whole Torah. If it's not going to have the whole Torah, then what are we left with? Yes, go right ahead.
The more I'm hearing what you're saying about this first fruits of Zion.
Yep.
Those guys they're an aberration. They're Judaizers.
Yes, they are.
The Torah class will teach this.
Okay. Again, his comment was the first fruits of Zion are not. Well, so here's, again, let me circle back around. As a ministerium, when we learned about the organization that was working here in the county, we said, okay, what are they learning? What are their materials? We started finding stuff, the workbook, the worksheets, the videos, the website, and we dug into it, hundreds and hundreds of pages from First Fruits of Zion. If you are a Torah club officially licensed with First Fruits of Zion, then that's who you're affiliated with, right? Like being part of the Boy Scouts of America, right? Okay. Again, in as much as that is true, we will be happy as a ministerium and as local pastors if what we are seeing here is never taught locally. But the only way for that to work is if you're skipping all of the stuff from the discipleship workbook that they're using right now, and from the Bible study materials that they're using right now. Either you're blacking those sections out and saying, don't pay attention to that, or you're explaining away all of that stuff in contradiction to the organization, or this is being taught in one form or another, to one extent or another, and in as much as it is being taught, it is deeply unorthodox and therefore very disconcerting to pastors in this community. Because as we would be for any organization that was teaching a different gospel. Yes?
I wonder, you keep saying the Torah class. Is that a Torah club?
Well, if you want to say club, I guess we could wear collars and stuff.
But I mean, I wonder if you're talking about the same thing.
Well, no, see, he's talking about the first fruits of Zion.
Right.
I never heard of him until here.
Good.
He is talking
Right.
about something specifically called the Torah class.
Well, yeah, he's lumping them together.
Okay. So,
You're not talking about the same thing.
It's something I attended, and I didn't join an organization.
okay. So let me try to clarify this so that we can put this issue to bed for now. It's a good conversation because, again, there are groups out there calling themselves Torah clubs that are not associated with the Hebrew roots movement at all, or just because they're studying the Old Testament, all right? Or they might be Messianic Jewish organizations, and within they're studying it from a Messianic Jewish perspective. In other words, the people studying that material are Jews. That's a different thing too. Or they might be affiliated with First Fruits of Zion. Again, First Fruits of Zion is a specific organization within this larger movement. They are the most dynamic one. They're the largest, fastest growing one. I told you that I read a survey where a person who's part of the Hebrew Roots movement did a survey of 600 people within the movement throughout North America. All right, the largest group were associated with First Fruits of Zion. I think it was more than a third, all right, that were associated with this one organization in the whole movement. It's by far the biggest one, the most influential one, the fastest growing one. And so again, this is what its leaders believe. This is what they publish. This is what they are hoping to accomplish. Let us look at this last section about what they believe about the gospel, and we will let that be what we think on before this week, before the finale next week. So bear with me. I will finish this section. I would say come hell or high water, but there is a river down there, so we don't want to tempt that too much. This next section, there are two parts to it. The first part is that this is another gospel. It is not the same gospel as the church has taught for 2,000 years. I will show you them saying that. All right? It is different, it is new, it is changed. All right? I call these the self-damning admissions of the leadership of First Fruits of Zion. They admit this. This is not me saying, I'm putting 2 to 2 and together and getting 4. This is them saying 2 and 2 plus 2 equals 4. They're saying it. They are proud of it. So let's take a look, and here's where, this is the last one before you can listen to them, not me. Oh, sorry, this is my understanding. This is not them, this is me speaking. Throughout the Franklin Christian Ministerium's research of First Fruits of Zion, we kept finding evidence that reinforced the conclusion that what they're teaching and selling is indeed another gospel. That's a term that matters to the Apostle Paul, right? A different gospel. When he says it's a different gospel, he takes it very seriously. Little did we know at the time, as through the winter and into the early spring, that the leadership of First Fruits of Zion was willing to tell their Torah club leaders and financial supporters that a gospel unconnected to the global church or its history is their goal. It was our understanding early on that they were misguided, that they didn't know that they had strayed into a different gospel. We found these videos and said, oh, you actually know that and you're happy about it. All right? I would say go look at these videos yourself, but you're going to have to give them $25 a month to do it. They took it behind the paywall a couple of weeks ago when they redid their website. But I got screen captures because you couldn't download the videos. So ignore the fact that for the first few seconds you're looking at my browser. I'll make it full screen. It'll be coming from there. Hopefully everyone will hear it just fine. So let me put it on there, and then I'll move around. This is Daniel Lancaster, the writer of virtually all their materials for the Torah clubs.
I mean, as this evangelical, I did not understand the full scope of the gospel message. That is for sure. Especially as it pertained to Israel. But I would say as it pertained to any human being, but especially as it pertained to Israel. Instead, I learned to divide the world, as I'm sure many of you did, into two types of people, the saved and the unsaved, right? Those who have been born again by accepting Jesus into their hearts for a personal relationship went into a category we called the saved, that is the Christians, and those without Jesus, the unsaved, the non-Christians. And those, so the onus was upon those of us who are the saved, that we have a responsibility and a mission to save the unsaved and persuade them to become Christians. Seems reasonable. In this respect, this approach to evangelism, from what I'm looking at now, it was a little naive and largely a misunderstanding of the gospel message. I mean, this is just not what Yeshua taught. We thought the gospel message was believe in Jesus so that you will go to heaven when you die. I mean, really, that was it. So believing the right things about Jesus, that was our sacrament. Having the right things in your head about Jesus, that was the thing that saved you. But that's not what Yeshua said, and that's not what he taught. When I started to learn the New Testament from a Jewish perspective and to study the teachings of the Jewish Yeshua, I discovered a totally different gospel message. In fact, it used to trouble me that he never said anything about becoming Christians. Didn't it trouble anyone else? I mean, it really troubled me. I'm talking as a teenager reading his, I remember throwing the Bible across the room, because it just seemed like everything contradicted, everything in the Bible contradicted everything I was learning in church. It's very...
So here's the quote, the transcript of that quote. I told you I'd have that so that you could see it for yourself. So there's a number of things there. I'm not going to read the whole quote. I'm going to read just the highlighted parts and focus in on those because we just heard him say these things. He said, "I did not understand the full scope of the gospel message." I would say truer words were never spoken. The version of the gospel he's talking about is not the gospel that's been preached in church history. He said, "I learned to divide the world into two types of people, the saved and the unsaved. Those who've been born again by accepting Jesus into their hearts for a personal relationship went into a category we called saved, that is the Christians, and those without Jesus, the unsaved, the non-Christians." The problem is, he's saying that ain't the gospel. Did you not hear the people laughing when he said that? And then at the end, they were laughing as well. I didn't pick up on that until today when I was listening to it louder. I was like, holy cow, why are we laughing? What is funny about that? That the world is people that are in Christ and not. That is standard understanding. But he says that's a little naive and largely a misunderstanding of the gospel message. Here's the second half of the quote. "Believing the right things about Jesus, that's the thing that saved you." Now, if he's saying that the gospel is only about believing and never about your behavior, never about repentance, then you're right, that's not the gospel. But that's not the gospel anyway. It's a straw man. When I started to learn the New Testament from a Jewish perspective and to study the teachings of the Jewish Yeshua, I discovered a totally different gospel message. And then we've got that canard about he never said anything about becoming Christians. Again, not relevant. I remember throwing the Bible across the room because it just seemed that everything contradicted. Everything in the Bible contradicted everything I was learning in church. I worry about your church. Now, this is Daniel Lancaster, and he grew up as an evangelical Baptist. My apologies. Again, for the Millerites, he was a Baptist, so I guess it's reasonable that a Baptist is here leading this because this is in our house in that sense. His father was a minister. And he says, the gospel I learned was just believe the right stuff about Jesus, you go to heaven when you die, that's all you need to worry about. Again, Dietrich Bonhoeffer had something to say about that kind of cheap grace, right? This is not the gospel. He paints that weak straw man, and then he tells people Jesus never told people to become Christians. You know why Jesus never told his followers to become Christians? Because they hadn't coined the term until the middle of the book of Acts. So yeah, he didn't say that. It doesn't make any sense. What did Jesus do? He said, "Be my disciples." And then he said, "I am founding this institution, this church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. And oh, by the way, the Comforter, the guide is coming, and he will lead you." So we got the first quote, where Daniel Lancaster says he found a totally different gospel than the one he was raised with. Here's the next one.
His message had nothing to do with consenting to a creed. He didn't introduce a new religion. Instead... All
right, that's a short one. Oops. His message had nothing to do with consenting to a creed. Nothing to do? Now, we could have an awesome conversation about how his message wasn't just about consenting to a creed. But that is a very different conversation than nothing to do with consenting to a creed. And then, of course, he didn't introduce a new religion. He's talking about Jesus. First Fruits of Zion's version of the gospel has nothing to do with what you believe about Jesus. And he will make that clear in a minute. All right? What you believe about Jesus is a greatly diminished concern to him. It's certainly not a new religion. Here's another quote that I don't have the video for. I hope tonight to communicate clearly that the message that all of us have heard, the gospel message that all of us have heard, is not the message of the gospel of the kingdom. It's a gospel, in fact, devoid of the kingdom. So the gospel you grew up with, the gospel that you knew, he's talking to a group of people, many of whom were raised in the church, and he's telling them that the gospel that you know is devoid of the kingdom, doesn't have the kingdom of God in it. A gospel that has, in fact, obscured the kingdom. So the church's gospel has made the kingdom of God harder to see. That one's from Boaz Michael, the founder and president. The gospel message is not what God wanted, the church's version of it. Here comes a more detailed version of that conversation. That's Boaz Michael.
Most followers of Yeshua have accepted him as their Savior, maybe as their Lord, but they have yet to see him as a humble rabbi from Nazareth, a teacher of Judaism, who upheld the Torah and the Jewish way of life. Missing these critical aspects of Yeshua's life and ministry doesn't just mean missing out on Shabbat or Passover. It means that we're missing the very cornerstone of his message, the gospel of the kingdom. In fact, the biggest difference, the biggest tension between post-supersessionist Christianity and Christianity, mainstream Christianity, isn't what holidays we keep or the kinds of foods we eat. It's not the biggest difference. It's our understanding of what Yeshua ultimately came to teach and accomplish. The church's gospel, the church's interpretation of Yeshua's core message, has been incomplete for nearly 2,000 years.
Okay. Let's break that down. We've seen something that most Christians haven't. Most followers of Yeshua have accepted him as their Savior, maybe as their Lord. I'm not even sure what he's trying to say there. So you call him Jesus Savior, but you're not willing to call him Lord, I think is what he's trying to say. Notice, and this is where we get to the rubber, and where the rubber hits the road. He's saying the biggest difference is not about the Sabbath keeping and kosher and all of that. That's the stuff that we all notice. He says the biggest thing is that our understanding of what Yeshua ultimately came to teach and accomplish is different. The church's gospel, the church's interpretation of Yeshua's core message has been incomplete for nearly 2,000 years. So let me say this, how much hubris does it take? And hubris is the Greek tragic flaw, right? If your Greek plays that you probably tried not to pay attention to in English class in high school, all right? The classic Greek flaw of Odysseus is hubris. The idea that you are so important that you can take on the gods. How much hubris does it take to say the gospel of the church has been incomplete for 2,000 years and I see it and I will solve it? But notice that's a blanket statement about the church. The church has been wrong, period, in their eyes. Now let me say to you, we've arrived at this place from a different destination, but we arrived at the exact same place as the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons, saying that the church was wrong and we've fixed it with their own change, right? And we see that about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and we see that about the Mormons. And the Ministerium, myself and the rest of the pastors are warning the community that this organization is heading down that same path. It's not recognizable now because they're brand new. But in time, that's what it's going to end up being. Because this is what they believe. Let's keep going. Here's another one.
Study the Gospels. What did Yeshua actually say to the crowds in Jerusalem? What did he actually teach his disciples on the Mount of Beatitudes? He said, or he didn't say, I'm going to die for your sins. He said, the time is fulfilled. The kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the gospel. This is the gospel of the kingdom. This is it. Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. It's a message to Israel, and it's a message that doesn't make sense without Torah, without Judaism, without Jewish people, and without Jewish identity.
I realize that the audio is not properly synced. I don't think I can fix that right now, but let's
study the gospel.
All right, so let's take a look at that quote. Study the Gospels. What did Yeshua actually say to the crowds? What did he actually teach his disciples on the Mount of Beatitudes? Now that's an interesting introduction, but why on earth are you saying he didn't say, I'm going to die for your sins? Why are you bringing that up? Why emphasize that? I don't understand that line of thought at all. What is the point of doing that? But remember, this is an organization that believes that the Levitical sacrificial system is coming back. So I wonder, how else is that bleeding into their understanding of what Jesus did? The time is fulfilled, the kingdom of God is at hand. Repent, believe in the gospel of the kingdom. And you're saying to yourself, why are we emphasizing the kingdom? Why are we talking about the kingdom so much? And there's the second half of the quote. Because the gospel message doesn't make sense without Torah, without Judaism, without Jewish people, and I would say amen to that. I want to see the Jewish people in the gospel, without Jewish identity. The gospel does not make sense without Jewish identity, is the founder and president of First Fruits of Zion saying this last year. This is not his early youthful days. Actually, I think I could be older than this guy. It's hard to say exactly. I didn't find the year he was born. Actually, he's a couple years ahead of me, but not much. A gospel without obeying Torah, practicing Judaism, and adopting Jewish identity doesn't make any sense. That's what they're saying. Okay? Oops.
Fullness of Yeshua's message. In 1 Peter 2:5, Peter compares the church to a spiritual house. Every house needs a firm foundation. The church has built its entire mission on an incomplete foundation, a partial gospel. This process began early, when church theologians intentionally stripped away the Jewish context of the New Testament. They believed that they were replacing Israel.
Okay. My editing skills are not perfect because you can't put this through software because it's no, I already did that. Right. Every house needs a firm foundation. Amen. True. The church has built its entire mission on an incomplete foundation on a partial gospel. The entirety of the church, incomplete and partial. Better define that, right? What's incomplete about it? What's partial about it? You believe there's something, And he believes it became early when church theologians intentionally, in other words, with nefarious intent, these early church fathers were not to be revered because they stripped away the Jewish context of the New Testament on purpose. Now, was there anti-Semitism in the early church? Absolutely. There was anti-Semitism in the medieval church and in the modern church. It is the great sin of the church, is its anti-Semitism. Written about that, talked about that endlessly. But notice, the church has never had the full gospel because the early church took it away. Let's look at a couple more quotes. We're almost to the end of our time and our section. The church today is floundering in the waves of cultural change with no Torah to guide them, no clear direction, no concrete moral compass. Like shattered glass, thousands of denominations and independent churches fight each other over theology and practice because their core message is missing something. The gospel of the kingdom has been replaced with an oversimplified distortion of Yeshua's message. Good to know that all of our fights as a denomination and with each other are because we've got a defunct gospel. I thought it was because we were mistaken and we had problems, but at least it's somebody else's fault. I am being facetious there. It is our fault when that happens. But Boaz, Michael, thinks that the non-unified church happens because our gospel is delinquent. It's inferior. Question. He says the church is floundering with no Torah to guide them. The reason the church is struggling is because we don't have the Torah. Can we not hear the voice of God in the rest of Scripture? Can we not hear God speak through Paul, through David, through parts of the Bible that are not Torah? Why would you say that? You say that because, as we demonstrated last week, they believe that only Torah is truly inspired. The rest is but an echo. The rest is but a dark vision. It's not truly the Word of God. Only Torah is. But of course, that is not what we believe about the Scriptures. I think this may be our last one. Let's do one more of these.
The same Christians who propagated this incomplete gospel also translated the Bible into languages all of us can understand. The whole world knows about the Messiah of Israel because of missionaries and their efforts. But they were only telling a small part of a much larger story. Perhaps Hashem has ordered that for a time. Let's consider this. It's temporary. The gospel of the kingdom needed to be watered down. It needed to be simplified so that at least some part of Yeshua's message, his name, would travel as far as possible and reach as many people as possible. But I believe that gospel and that time is coming to an end. I believe that the missionary efforts of the church have paved the way for the original gospel of the kingdom. Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. To begin to make its way to the ends of the earth. I believe the gospel of the kingdom is a message whose time has finally come. I believe.
Okay. So once again, we have the incomplete gospel, but here is the shocker. Perhaps Hashem, perhaps God, has ordered that for a time, the gospel of the kingdom needed to be watered down. It needed to be simplified so that at least some part of Yeshua's message, his name, would travel as far as possible and reach as many people as possible. His understanding of the gospel is that it was necessary for God to water it down so that missionaries could take it to the peoples of the world, because apparently otherwise they would not have believed it. Is this the power of God at work through the Holy Spirit? God saying to himself, you know, this gospel that we're trying to tell people, it's a tough sell. Let's give them the diet version for a while, get them used to that, and then we can bring the real stuff later. I mean, holy cow. Why on earth would God let the church flounder with an incomplete gospel for 2,000 years? And why were missionaries so successful in spreading a gospel that was devoid of its true power? How'd they manage that? All right. By the way, that's not what God does. That's not how God operates in this world. He doesn't say, you know, people, you can't hack it my way, so I'm just going to give you something easy for a while. And then a couple thousand years from now, don't worry about it. We'll let people know the real story. I mean, that just is not what we know of God. Here's another quote. Bringing Yeshua's message to the Gentiles is the whole purpose of the Torah Club. If you're a Torah Club leader or a student, you're part of this prophetic movement to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom to all nations. Even if it's not happening at pulpits and churches or in theological textbooks or in altar calls, it's happening in your living room. Gentile Christians are finally discovering Yeshua's message. So don't worry if the church ain't teaching it, we've got it instead. He didn't say ain't. I was an English teacher for 10 years. I shouldn't have said it either. But according to First Fruits of Zion, the church is not bringing the gospel of message to the world. Only they are, only in this generation for the very first time. I believe there is a seed already planted by the gospel message that's been sent out, that it's ready to be watered, ready to be nurtured so that it blossoms into the gospel of the kingdom. And as kingdom goes from something that looks dry and dead to something that is green, plush, and beautiful. Who's dry and dead? We are, the church. The gospel that we have is dry and dead, but they're going to water it and make it grow and make it beautiful. Because the seed was planted. That's some slow germination, right? 2,000 years, and now we're ready. I've got 5 more slides, bear with me. According to the bad news of the gospel that missionaries ordinarily offer to Israel, Jews who don't believe in Jesus, suffer in hell for eternity. So that's a good opening line. This is Lancaster being sarcastic again. Along with the vast majority of humanity, so at least you won't be lonely. But if you consent to believe in Jesus, you can escape that fate in hell, wherein, of course, almost all of Israel perishes, but the only catch is that you need to quit being Jewish because in Jesus, there's no such thing as Jew and Gentile. I'm not kidding. I said I'm going to be a little facetious, but that is the message. That's the implicit message anyway, that Jesus does away with Judaism and Jewish identity. So this is the guy writing the Torah Club materials, and he's mockingly disdaining the idea that believing in Jesus will affect whether you end up in heaven or hell. How can I say that? I've got more of that same idea. Likewise, the traditional message to the world doesn't sound like good news for the nations either. It sounds, like something like this. God created you to be a worthless sinner. From the moment you were conceived, God destined you to suffer in hell forever. And if you've ever broken a single commandment, well, it doesn't really matter because Adam did for you, but you've broken them all. And of course, all have sinned and fallen short of his impossibly high expectations. And the wages of that is eternal torment along with the Jews. So therefore, you're consigned under God's eternal wrath unless you consent to a certain set of theological propositions according to one side of the church or a specific sacramental series of rituals according to the other side of the church. Lancaster thinks that the gospel is bad news. And he thinks that God's expectations are impossibly high. You know what? The Apostle Paul agrees. They are impossibly high, but we have an answer to that. It's called grace. It's called faith in the power of the Spirit at work within us. But honestly, I don't think this man ever understood what the gospel message is, what the church traditionally has taught. Because every time he talks about it, he's painting a picture of some of the worst preaching that is done, but not what the church teaches. I can find you somebody who's just into soul winning. Get people to say a sinner's prayer and then get them out the door because that was all we needed. But that is not what most of us are doing. We're trying to make disciples. Oh, at least he's done. Okay, I'm done being facetious now. And again, I apologize. I'm just trying to make a point. When you put it like that, the gospel does, it sounds pretty bleak. And it sounds a little absurd. That's not good news for anyone. That would be bad news. And that particular formulation of the message probably did work pretty well in the Middle Ages, when you could frighten people with dogmas that dangle them over hell only inches above, and a host of horned demons with pitchforks. It might have sold well in the Reformation, when people were willing to accept anything that could liberate them from the authority of Rome. But it just does not have a lot of traction with the average thinking person today. Who wants a religion like that? Who needs it? So the church's gospel was great with those bumpkins in the Middle Ages when they were scared of hell. And it was fine during the Reformation when people would believe anything to get away from Rome. But no thinking person today wants that gospel. Hey, all right. Next, two more. Outside of the Jewish context, really, when you strip it back, doesn't really make a lot of sense. It comes out convoluted. It comes out sideways like this, and it comes out in a way that really repels people, rather than drawing them near to the kingdom and nearer to God. It's rather than a message about God's love for Israel and his love for all humanity. Even though that's what we say it comes out, it sounds, when you really read between the lines of what we're saying, it sounds an awful lot like a message about God's hatred for Israel and for human beings in general. And so we got something wrong here. Lancaster believes that in his opinion, the traditional gospel at the heart of the church is God's hatred for Israel and humanity. That's what we're trying to sell. Now, that is a very bold statement, but it's a deeply heretical statement. To say that the gospel as given to the church and propagated by the church for 2,000 years is really just telling people that God hates them. Says an awful lot about what they think about our ancestors in the faith too, right? Next to last. Where's the good news in the replacement theology version of the good news? Israel's been replaced, the Torah has been canceled, and God's covenant with the Jewish people is over. Adding insult to injury, replacement theology posits that Jewish people's relationship with God has been replaced by a new order and mechanism for salvation, thereby damning most Jews to eternity in hell. I need to unpack that. He's claiming that the gospel as the church has taught it is a new order and mechanism for salvation. But the church does not believe that. What does Hebrews 11 say? Our ancestors in Israel were saved by faith. They looked forward to the Messiah to come. We look back on the Messiah who came. It's always been by faith. So what is his understanding of the gospel? That he believes that we've changed how people are saved. The hint here is that Jews were being saved by the law back in the day. And you're saying, wait a minute, he didn't say that. He's about to in the next quote. And that is a radical thought, because the Apostle Paul begs to differ. Here's our last one for tonight. A Christian Zionist might say, I don't teach replacement theology. The Jewish people are still the chosen people, but without Christ, they're still under the law. By under the law, he means lost and going to hell. Any Bible-believing evangelical might say Christians don't replace Jews, but Jews need to come to Christ to be saved. Amen? How is this not replacement theology? The premise is that unless Jews become Christians, they'll be damned. So basically, he's saying something that the universalists have said. Jesus isn't all that important. Because you can't say that if the Jews don't have Jesus, they're damned. That if they reject the Messiah, they're in trouble. But that is exactly what the Apostle Paul had to say to his own people, right? Why is he wrestling in Romans with the rejection of Jesus by his own people? Why is he telling us it's causing him deep anguish of heart? I just got done preaching that part of Romans a few months ago. My church knows. I got into that. Nor is there salvation in any other, right? Acts 4:12. No other name under heaven. And we'll leave it with that because we are 5 minutes over already. Any last quick questions before we wrap it up? Next week, we've got one more section on what they think about the church, and then we're looking at the early church fathers, the Reformation, and a bunch of biblical texts. All right, yes, quick question, go ahead.
Okay, my name is Judy Babuzzo. I'm a Torah club leader.
Hello, Judy.
I've been in Torah clubs for almost 5 years. I read a lot of your materials. I was saved in 1980. I've been a Christian for 4 years. I've been unorthodox and mostly Baptist denominations. I do not agree with what you were saying or how you were painting what First Fruits of Zion was our teaching.
Do you want to come closer because the mic is not going to pick you up and no one watching on Facebook Live will have any idea what you're saying?
No, I'll just leave it here for people to hear.
Okay.
So what I would just advise is you need to make your own decisions. This has been a very good presentation. I would never try to have a debate with you. You would every time you're excellent at what to do. And I am too old to gain the skills at my age.
That's not true.
Yeah, I think it is. Just, look for it yourself. I would just recommend 2 books if you want to get FFOZs. If you want to get everything in context, is to read the Tent of David and read Restoration. And from there, take everything he said, make a choice. But I have not found that you are adequately or correctly representing what FFOZ believes in his teaching.
Okay.
Thank you.
So for people that couldn't hear that, Judy is saying she is a local Torah club leader and this is not an accurate representation of what First Fruits of Zion believes. But again, I'm fine, put it before you. These are all direct quotes. Did the phone die? Well, the phone is dying, so.
They're all out of context and incomplete.
Okay. Well, those are huge, long quotes. You see before and after them. You see the words. You see Boaz Michael in his own words talking about the gospel.
They're still incomplete.
Okay.
Given them the entire
I will be happy to hear a explanation why our quotes don't mean what we all think they mean. If you can show me any quote whose context changes how we should understand it, I will be happy to read it. Because I read hundreds of pages. I read this entire workbook from cover to cover.
Is that your highest?
Yes. The whole thing from front to back. And that's and quoted it extensively here tonight.
They've come out with the new edition 2023, so they're not going to jar. I'm sure Powell will give them a chance to say how good you got course.
Okay, yes. Well, this has been their main book since 1998, and this is like the 2020 edition. No, I didn't buy the newest edition.
That's fine. Anybody who wants to check them out.
Yep.
If you get the new one, they're not going to jive with his number or dates or updates.
Page numbers, no doubt. Page Nation always changes.
Okay. I would like to come back next week. I will reply.
You can share your viewpoint. I'm happy to hear it.
No, I'm just going to listen. I've said all I'm going to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We'll pick it up next week. I'm sorry we went so far over, but. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I gotta